Welcome to the Core Outdoors podcast. My name is Christian Rawls. This episode is a conversation with Aaron Lutze. Aaron is a full-time content creator. He has a mountain biking YouTube channel called Super Rider, and he's the co-host of the Second Nature podcast. Prior to focusing on content, Aaron spent 12 years at Red Bull as an athlete manager and a field marketing manager. I wanted to have this conversation with Aaron because he has an interesting perspective on how brands and creators should be working together to create compelling content. As you hear in this conversation, Aaron is focused on delivering a ton of value and building a community. Two things to focus on if you want long-term success. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to let you know that we are a couple of weeks away from announcing the lineup of speakers and presenters at this year's Core Summit. The Core Summit is a 2-day conference unlike any other in the outdoor industry. It's the only event where early-stage founders, seasoned veterans, designers, retailers, and all points in between get together to connect and learn from each other. To learn more about the summit and the work that Core does, check out coreoutdoors.org. The link is in the show notes. And now, please enjoy this conversation with Aaron Lutze. There's a number of reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show. I mean, you're building an outdoor media company, it seems like. I would just say that. I'm projecting that on you, but it seems like you're building an outdoor media company. You're a solopreneur in a lot of ways. You're kind of going at it alone. You're a supporter of challenger brands. Actually, I don't know if you and Dylan created that term, challenger brands, but I'm attributing it to you.
We'll take it, though. We'll take it. No,
okay, because I think I've used it in almost every podcast I've recorded. I use the term challenger brand, and I have given you attribution. So you're going to continue to get the challenger.
Okay,
brand.
I'll gladly take it. I think we pulled it from some article or something at some point. I feel like it's relatively common now when people are talking about stuff. I was actually having a really interesting conversation with Elisa from Terex about this, and she referenced Adidas as a challenger brand, and I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, you guys are like one of the big brands. She's like, not with Terex. Like, we consider ourselves to be a challenger brand. And she's like, I appreciate, like, you've been around Adidas long enough to know the history and how long we've actually been doing outdoor stuff, which is true. Like, they've been doing outdoor stuff for ages, but like maybe in their minds, you know, they still feel like they haven't gotten the traction that they deserve for all the effort.
How do you define challenger brand then for yourself? Like when you're thinking about it, how do you define it?
I mean, I would just say the challenger brand is someone who is sort of really gaining a lot of traction in the short term that is sort of taking market share away from the big dogs like Nike, you know? And I think that, you know, probably the challenger brands are going to hold on to that title for longer than they sort of deserve, you know, like Hoka, and like the fact that you would consider even Lulu to be a challenger brand feels weird. Like, they're making billions of dollars, but they get lumped in all the time because for a little bit there, at least, they were trying to do footwear. So for me, it's like, I guess that the idea of the challenger brand is somebody who is taking a big bite out of the incumbents, like the Nikes. And again, that's where the Adidas thing had me scratching my head, because I'm like, you guys are established, you know, where, you know, On has not been around that long. Hoka has not been around that long, and they're actually really making like big strides forward. So that's sort of the ones that are like big enough to be doing damage to the incumbents, but not so big that, you know, people are putting a target on their back yet. So they're in that kind of sweet spot between the two.
Right.
That's how I think about it, at least.
But Hoka and On definitely have targets on their backs now.
Now, maybe. Yeah.
But they spent a great period of time when they were just doing their thing.
I'm so scratching my head on that new Roger Federer Elmo ad. Have you seen that one?
No.
There's an ad that On obviously put a lot of money and licensing into to get Elmo from Sesame Street into a video with Roger Federer, where they're like, oh, it's not QC, it's On. And Elmo's like, what are you talking about? And that's the ad. It's just like an sort of like, hey, can you make it so people know that we're On and not QC because the O looks like a Q?
Right.
I was like, you wasted a lot of money to just like make sure people knew your name. Like, if you were going to license Elmo, why wouldn't you talk about, I don't know, the new kids line of shoes that you have coming out? Like, that feels like a more relevant spend, right?
On.
So I think if you're a challenger brand, you're not immune from missteps.
Let's just be clear. I don't think anybody's... everybody can make a misstep.
True. Fair enough.
Fair enough. So I'm curious about what the story is. So you're kind of an OG trials rider, and you had this production company basically making VHS tapes and distributing VHS tapes of the behind the scenes niche culture of trials mountain biking. And then you leave that, you have this illustrious career at Red Bull.
Mhm.
Then you go to Aura Ring. But then now you give it all up and you come back to being a content creator.
Yeah, that's always the joke. My buddy Eric Porter, who's also been in the mountain bike industry for a long time, has been running a YouTube channel as well. Always gives me a hard time. He's like, "So you were traveling around the world with your friends, filming mountain bike videos, living the dream, and then you stopped doing that, and then you got a real job, and then you quit that real job so that you could travel around the world making bike videos with your friends." Like, okay. Uh, I think it was, the thing that's most important is that the ability to create content and to edit and to film has sort of just always been an arrow in the quiver. And one of the things that I learned at Red Bull was like you just need enough information to be dangerous. I will never be the best filmmaker or an Alex Rankin or a Clay Porter or anybody on that level. I'm just not that good. But I have enough information to be dangerous when it comes to making content. And I think that, especially in this era of YouTube, where you don't have to have the most polished thing as long as you're developing and delivering value to the audience, like that's what actually matters more than what camera are you using. Are you doing rack focus on your bike? Are you getting enough B-roll? Like that stuff is helpful, but not necessary when you can now really just like bring value to people at scale using this platform. And so in a way, it's sort of like a return to form of, oh, I found a way that I could do this again in a meaningful way. And there's sort of like a business model that exists that is sort of exponential and unlimited if you play it out to the maximum level. And so, part of the reason why I picked up the camera again and why I started doing it when I was at Red Bull, I was pushing a lot of my athletes to create content, to become podcasters or YouTube, or just really putting a finer point on what they were creating. And at a certain point, you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is to be like, you know what? You guys are the most elite athletes in the world, and you probably have the easiest path to success with content and specifically YouTube or podcast because people already care about you. So if you don't believe me, I'm nobody. Like I'm corporate guy over here. Yeah, I have like a skill set that I developed when I was 18, but also like I don't have a following anywhere. Watch this. And then in a couple years, I'm at 100,000 subscribers starting from zero, where none of them had started from zero. So part of it was to sort of prove a point, and part of it was actually just to learn as much as I possibly could, because the best advice I give you in content creation is like make 100 videos, get 1% better every single time you make a video. And by that 100th video, you're going to be in great shape. And so part of it also was not only kind of like showing them, but also learning enough that I could come back around and share that insight with the athletes that were serious. So now I can have a really high level discussion with an athlete, being like, here's how I would structure this. Here's how I would develop your content strategy based on my 5 years of focused effort on YouTube. These are the elements that I would really be thinking about when it comes to crafting your story, producing your content, sharing it out, getting the maximum value out of it. And then also with that Rebel background, here's how I'd be putting it in front of sponsors and how I think it could dramatically impact your career. So I kind of took a long way around on that whole thing, but I see a ton of value in content. But I also just picked up my camera because I wanted to learn even more than I had already learned. Like I got the basics of editing and shooting and all that stuff down back in the day. But now that there are platforms and different ways to distribute that content, there's an even bigger opportunity. And I was actually talking to somebody else recently. He said, content is king, but distribution is queen. And you have so many different ways to distribute that content now and reach audiences and build a community. There's something really exciting there for a lot of people to sort of unlock. And that's the learning curve that I've been on recently.
Did you start the YouTube channel? I mean, I think originally it was your name. It had your name, your personal name kind of attached to the YouTube channel. At what point did you say, okay, actually, no, I'm going to create a brand around this?
It's actually sort of a funny story. Originally, the channel was called Lutze Time. I don't know why. I just wanted to have a name for the channel instead of just being my name. I felt weird about that at first, although maybe I shouldn't have. And I was having lunch with Dylan Bowman, and he had gone through some rebranding for his media stuff. He originally started out with a podcast called The Well, and then he launched Pillars, and then that eventually turned into Free Trail. And so we, had always talked about rebranding, resetting, and kind of building off these platforms. And the thing that I actually wanted to do the most with my channel and sort of the original vision, because I started off in trials, which is a very small sport, but one of the things that I desperately wanted to do was bring back this TV show. And basically, the TV show was this Japanese show, and there was a segment within the show called Super Rider. And I wanted to bring back Super Rider because I thought that would play really well on YouTube now. If you fast forwarded this piece of content from the 90s into 2025, it would absolutely smash. And guess what? There's a skate version of it called Kasso, Kasso. That's basically exactly that. It's like Ninja Warrior, but on skateboarding. And that's what Super Rider was. It was Ninja Warrior, but on bikes. You'd have all these crazy courses and people that have to ride through them. And so a big reason why I rebranded to Super Rider was not necessarily to create a brand for my stuff, but it was the intention of I want to bring back this show. This is super important to me. And if I accomplish only one thing, it's to bring this into reality. I want this show to come back because when I was coming up as a rider, I desperately wanted to be on that show. So now what if I've got this tutorial channel where I teach people to ride? What if I could make the show happen? And then people would watch the show, go back and watch the tutorials. And then what would happen if like season 5, somebody saw season 1, went back into the tutorials, learned to ride, and then competed in season 5? How sick would that be? And how impactful would that be for the sport of trials? And I think one thing that connects every single trials rider specifically is that we all desperately want people to care about our sport. Like it's not about sharing the sport. It's that we want people to care about the sport. And yes, absolutely to get into the sport, but I don't know, like it's such a cool thing to be able to essentially do magic with your bike. And I guess, I don't know, we're just a bunch of like nerdy magicians just like desperately hoping that other people care about it.
Is Super Rider the I don't know, is it a game show? That's called a game show. Is that still the dream?
I would love to bring it back. And we actually did have a deal in place. Like we worked with Red Bull. The IP was, handed over. Like we did everything to get it all dialed in. And then literally at the last moment, we had the production team picked out. We had the budget assigned. Everything was set. And then they pulled the budget at the last second. We were having like meetings every single day. And then all of a sudden they canceled the meeting. And then I didn't get an email response the next day. And I didn't get a text the next day. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. And sure enough, like a week later, a dude finally calls me back. He's like, I've been dreading this phone call. Dude, I'm so sorry. And basically what had happened, the Red Bull used to do the World Cup downhill live stream. And then the UCI, I don't know the exact story, but the UCI basically sold the rights to Discovery instead of keeping Red Bull in the mix, which a lot of people have opinions on. I'll leave that where it is. But basically, Red Bull had all this money that they were going to put into the World Cup. And then they were kind of like, well, now what? And I was just like, right place, right time. Like, I got an idea. Your number one mountain bike content, highest performing of all time is trials. Danny McCaskill, Fabio Widmer, Tomomi Nishikubo. Like, your number one videos are all the same sport. What if you developed a show based on that? And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. And so that was sort of my in to have that discussion. And of course, I knew all these guys because I've been working with them for the past 12 years. But I think the thing that we ran up against, they were like, well, we don't want our top guys competing against a bunch of other people and then potentially getting crushed by the next generation of riders. So the fact that there wasn't really a window for Red Bull athletes to compete in a potential Red Bull TV program basically became the one giant question mark. And I think ultimately, if I think critically of why it didn't happen and why, they had other stuff that they were working on too, like Hardline, they added locations to it and they built that out even more, which was definitely the right call. And they put out resources into other bike things since then too. But if I had to be really critical of like why it maybe was an easier call to pull from the budget, that was probably it.
Yeah. Well, I hope to see Super Rider one day out there. The show, the contest.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
In the meantime, it's a great way to, I think it still works as a mountain bike tutorial channel and as sort of the rest of the content that I'm doing with it, in that, you could become a super rider, learning these techniques and applying them. And now we're doing a bit more travel stuff to show where else you could ride. So I think it's still applicable. And I think that's it. Like super rider is sort of general. We had some trouble trying to sell merch because a lot of people that follow the channel are sort of beginner intermediate riders, and they felt kind of sheepish wearing a shirt that said super rider because they hadn't yet become super riders. They were still learning the basics. So I'm not really sure what to do with that one, but I do think overall I'm going to continue whether or not we get to do the show. I'm going to stick with the name for indefinitely, I guess.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, now that you say it, too, also it does have I can see why it sounds like a Japanese name. It sounds like a name that Japanese people would come up for an English show, the English name for a Japanese show. It's great. It's a good name.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to pronounce than my last name. Most people can't say Lutze for some reason, or at least on the first try. So, Super Rider, it's pretty hard to mess that one up.
Yeah, it's good. Turning the focus a little bit more on the idea of like challenger brands or up and coming brands or whatever we want to call them. I tend to categorize challenger brands as more of the up and comers, maybe not quite challenger yet. But so for those kind of up and comer brands, content is super important to them, right? Like just how do you create content? What's the best way to create content? It's like the machine needs this content kind of forever, hamster wheel style content creation. So what do you think are the best practices for small brands or challenger brands to work with content creators and to have like a win-win out of it, right?
I do think there's a really big opportunity around brands connecting and building long-term relationships with both content creators and their communities. And I think what's important about content creators is exactly that. That was my initial insight at Red Bull too, because it didn't come from sports. It actually came from gaming. I saw one of the gamers that I managed turn on his computer and 5,000 people instantly showed up. And he did a fundraiser one day and raised $70,000. And it was like, whoa, there's a lot of people that care about what this guy has to say and what he has to think. And this community is locked in on the things that he's locked in on. So what would it look like if an athlete could do that? And how could they build that? And of course, content's the answer to that. They build community through content. So how I would think about it as a brand, or who are the people that I could work with that represent a large community that align so perfectly with my brand that a partnership actually makes sense, where we're relevant to them, we're relevant to their community, and by working really closely with them over a long period of time, we could really build something special. You see now happening where big creators, Mr. Beast, Logan Paul, KSI, Ryan Trahan, are putting out their own products, and then those are getting distribution and selling, and they're earning money off of that. And I think that this trend of creators developing and putting their own products out is only going to get stronger as these content creators learn how to make their own stuff. But not every content creator wants to do engineering and QC and customer service and everything like that. And so I think smart, smaller brands can find people that represent their values, represent their audience really well, and build a meaningful partnership that will last a long time. And I think that probably the biggest mistake that's happening now is that a lot of brands, are big and small, are trying to find these quick wins where they can like get awareness really quickly and get in front of an audience one time or two times, or kind of testing the waters. But the real magic actually happens when you have a developed relationship where those athletes or content creators sort of represent that brand. If you think about Red Bull as an example, surely not a challenger brand by any means, but think about how the sort of identity of that athlete exists with Red Bull. How many Red Bull athletes do you know who have only been on Red Bull for 1 month, or for 1 year for that matter, right? Most Red Bull athletes that you can come up with off the top of your head right in this second have been on Red Bull for over a decade. And I don't think that that's a mistake, or that's, what am I trying to say? I think that there's a reason for that. And I think that locking in long-term with somebody is a meaningful, valuable thing. And I think that it's very intentional that Red Bull does that. They spend a bit of time on the front end, and I can tell you this because I've done it myself, spend a lot of time on the front end really finding the right fit, the right partnership, and developing the relationship with that person to feel confident that, like, yeah, when we sign this person, it's gonna go, it's gonna work, and it's gonna work for a long time because we see what their competitive career is gonna do, but we also have ideas for other stuff that we want to do with them. And I think any challenger brand could take that same approach of who are the handful of people that we could work with over a long period of time that so perfectly align with us that it would make sense for us to make content with them for a long, long time. And it would be valuable to both us and to their community and to the creator. You're looking for that like perfect overlap in the Venn diagram. And I think that the content sphere right now, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads like, oh, we got to just test this and see what happens. And, I've been in a lot of these discussions lately where it's like, we just want to test, one integration with you. And it's like, I mean, you can, but it's not gonna give you any real data. Like yeah, people will click out of curiosity, but if they saw that you were backing me for a long period of time and I'm constantly talking about how awesome this is, and not only like I'm reading off whatever you have to say. I don't think that's it. I think it's like I'm talking about the things that we're doing together, It's not like Dylan was never talking about like, oh, I drink Red Bull all the time and it's so great. It was, hey, I did this project with Red Bull and like check out this thing that we did together. Here's this thing I'm doing with them and here's this. And branding is obviously present, but like there's depth to it instead of like, hey, read this or tell your community about us. I just think there's a way to do more with less and make it more meaningful. And I think that people miss the meaningful part of the partnership when it comes to not just finding the people to work with, but also the execution itself.
Maybe it's something like we encounter ambassador marketing or influencer marketing or content creation more from a performance marketing standpoint as opposed to a brand marketing standpoint, where the description you just gave of Dylan Bowman and Red Bull is more of like a brand. This is brand marketing, right? We're playing the long-term game. We're trying to establish community. Whereas I think sometimes we think of a transactional, like when we work with a content creator, it's going to be transactional. It's like, you do these three things, I get these three things. And that's how it's going to work.
It's funny though, right? Because if you're working with a content creator that you respect, clearly they can make content well. And so why couldn't they make brand and performance content for you? It's not like they can only make one. I mean, any content creator that's gotten to this point that they're having a discussion with a brand of partnering up and working together has an idea of how to reach audiences at scale. And whether it's performance marketing or brand marketing, I think they're capable. And sure, you could work together to get there, but yeah, I don't understand why a brand they wouldn't grasp that this person is capable of making content about just about anything at this point. If they've made it to the table in a negotiation and we picked them out as a good fit for us, why wouldn't they be able to make both performance and brand marketing stuff? And that's one of the things that I've run into of like, hey, can I also talk to your meta ads team? Can I talk to these people? Or can we also make this kind of content? I recently pitched something where I was like, hey, I love this integration idea. I love what you're trying to do here, but I want to tell this bigger story about using your platform and developing this thing out. And they're like, oh, we didn't think about that. And I was like, there's a really cool content story that could unfold over the course of a year. And this is sort of what that looks like. So I think there's really intentional ways to move forward. And I think you have to take a step back and realize that the reason why you're in this conversation in the first place is that this person has established themselves as someone who not only is maybe good at a sport, but is capable of translating their thoughts into a medium that lots of people can access.
I think you touched on something right there. You said the word story, and I think that's a key component of it, is that we need to be able to have the time and space to be able to tell stories, and stories take time and space, right? So it can't just be a one and done or a few and done type of thing. You need that time to kind of breathe, let it breathe and roll out.
And there's research to back this up. I'm not just like saying stuff, there's research that basically says you need to see a message 12 times before it kicks in. And I think that's why these like test marketing cases just don't work, because it's like, well, yeah, I'm probably not the 12th time they've seen this message. I'm the first. And that's great. But let me also be the 12th. Let me build this out. Let's let it breathe. Let's turn it into something that's valuable. Because yeah, imagine if you did anything one time, you're never going to get good at it. You're never really going to like make an impact. If you really commit and have intention of, succeeding with this thing. There was a great quote that we talked about on Second Nature not too long ago. It said, trying is having an intentional to fail. Like, just go for it. Like lock in, be intentional, let it develop. Really, yeah, maybe it means that you're pickier with which creators you're going to start working with, but also find the meaning, find the depth, find somebody that can really tell that story and spend a little extra time getting there. And I think it will be worth it as opposed to like just, shotgun approach and hoping for the best.
Yeah, the spray and pray. I've heard you talk about the idea of latching onto a user group, and maybe latching is not the right word, but partnering with a kind of up and coming user group to be able to build your brand around. And that's something you did. It sounds like it's something you did when you were at Aura Ring with CrossFitters. So I was wondering if you could just chat a little bit about that idea of finding. I mean, you can definitely see it in play right now in trail running. You can see it in hunting. You can see it in these different categories where it's like this thing's on the rise and people are kind of moving that way. What does that look like, and how did you use that?
Well, there's two different approaches to this whole thing. I think you're right in that there have been brands that have been successful over time that have, found their communities as the communities are sort of exploding. So CrossFit's a great example of that. The other thing that I would also reference is this idea of the entry point consumer. And the entry point consumer is someone you can access at literally any time in any category you're trying to reach. And in fact, that's a big way to really kind of be the first voice or the first opportunity to speak to these people that are coming in. So for example, in mountain biking, I'm speaking to the entry point consumer because I'm talking to people who are just getting into the sport or are just starting to take it seriously or, kind of just wanting to develop their skill set. And I will be the first teacher for them. And yeah, maybe they'll go into some other stuff later down the line. They'll get really into racing or free ride or whatever, but I'm their entry point into the sport. And I think that there's a lot of trust that comes with that. There's a lot of value that comes with that. There's a lot of, identity that comes with like, oh, I learned from this person. And I think, even at Red Bull, the entry point consumer was the person that they handed, how you got your first Red Bull. If you ask a lot of people, like, where did you have your first Red Bull? A lot of people will say like, oh, this person like drove a Mini Cooper around and they handed one to me and I tried it and I couldn't sleep and I went home and cleaned my house and, whatever. That's an entry point consumer. The first time you had this experience, and then that experience is tied to that brand for a long, long time. So I think about that in a content sense of if you're just getting into mountain biking and I was the first person to unlock how to lift your front wheel or whatever, you're going to keep coming back to me to see what else you can learn and where else you can develop. And there's a ton of value in that. And I'm not competing against that many people because I'm the first person to introduce you. Whereas within the sport of mountain biking, there's a lot of people at the top of the mountain doing like the gnarliest things, but they're fighting against everyone else that's doing the gnarliest stuff. And so this idea of being at the entry point, I think has even more value because at the top end, yes, you're aspirational, but at this entry point, you're getting, trust from these people. You're getting identity, you're getting engagement. And I think that's where a lot of brands could actually get more for it. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is, can you identify a growing group? And I think that one is more trend spotting. That could be a little bit harder to get. And it's not always happening. I mean, CrossFit, now there's High Rocks, right? That's the next one that's kind of coming around. But these trends don't necessarily show up, day in and day out. So you got to be really paying attention. And there's not necessarily, there is sometimes a first mover advantage, but it's not guaranteed. I mean, for every CrossFit that's out there, there's probably like a P90X VHS or DVD tape sitting around. So it's not a guaranteed thing, but I think that the thing that you look for is this community engagement. One of the things that CrossFitters do really well is share what they know with other people, whether it comes to nutrition, their workouts, what gear they're using, whatever else. And I think that the communication between those people in that community is the most important thing to kind of harness. And if you can be at that kind of sweet spot between a trend that's rising and a community that's communicating on a regular basis, then there's some magic to be had there.
Do you think we're seeing the similar thing in trail running? I just, as a outsider to trail running, I know that it's not necessarily it's all anecdotal in the sense that like year over year sales, it went up by 6%, I think the number was, but that's basically because of price increases. It's not necessarily, we're not selling more shoes, but anecdotally it feels like, my God, my dentist is now a trail runner. Like it's happening, it's everywhere. Is that something that you like, how do you relate that to the kind of the CrossFit of maybe a decade ago?
Yeah, you could definitely see it. You're right. Anecdotally, it feels like people are sort of aging out of pounding their knees on the road and switching to like softer trails and stuff. That feels, as someone who's about to turn 45, that definitely feels very, very relevant. And I do think like there's an opportunity to be there, to meet people there, and you see a lot of brands kind of pushing into the space or trying to become relevant to both trail and ultra running. And I think there's definitely something there. Where is the community coming together? Is it in the Free Trail Pro membership where they've got a Slack channel where people are all talking about stuff? Is it at the races? Certainly the participation is really high in these events, and we're seeing similar stuff happen in gravel. My biggest question is going to be, where are these people congregating, and where are they, where are they exchanging information, and if you can be in that place. One thing that I think is sort of a struggle is with CrossFit, you have these places where people are physically coming together week in and week out, where the frequency of that for, say, gravel racing or for trail running is not as great. Maybe you go to 3 or 4 races a year. So that'd be my one push on that. Or what's the frequency in which these people are coming together to engage in this activity? Is it enough to make the communication grow? And if they aren't coming in together, how are they communicating, and how are they spreading that insight and information? So, yeah, the group of people doing it is growing, but also congruent to that needs to be the communication.
Brings up a good point, because something I want to talk to you about was you spent a few years, I think, early on at Red Bull in field marketing, which is essentially, from what I understand, bringing people together around Red Bull.
Yes, it's giving a local face to a global brand. It's how they kind of teed it up.
I like it. It seems like kind of similar to what we were just talking about, of the events bringing people together. We see this in run clubs. It looks like, I heard like run clubs are giving like Tinder a run for its money in dating apps, because it's like,
amazing.
Just go to a run club. You have better odds of finding a good match. What did you learn from field marketing and kind of those live events, and where do you think that's going, and kind of the importance that plays in brand building?
Yeah. What's funny now that I think about it? My first official time meeting my wife was I used to run with the Hash House Harriers in San Francisco. And my first actual time meeting her in person was at the Hash. I invited her out, which was, I don't know, best or worst idea ever to take her to an event like that. But we actually did meet technically at a run club. We met through friends, but then that. So
see, run clubs, it's the place to go to meet your spouse.
Yeah, it worked. And I think the magic there was that although we had been introduced beforehand, we actually spent an hour talking to each other in a pretty low stress environment where, if she didn't like me, she could have just run away.
Just stop to tie her shoe and say she'll catch up with you later.
Yeah. I need you to ask the question again, because I can go in about 80 different directions on field marketing. But what specifically?
Yeah, similar to the idea of bringing people together. Like the importance of, if you're going to build a brand and you're going to build, let's say, a challenger brand, you need to be able to build a community. And
Yes.
you got to take that community offline at some point. You got to bring them together at some point. So I'm just curious, it didn't even have to be what you learned from time field marketing with Red Bull, but more like what do you see, and like what do you see the advantage of and the importance of, and then literally like the nuts and bolts of how can brands do this effectively, and what does that look like?
Oh, I've got so many thoughts on this one.
Let's
I'm going
go.
to try to organize them. The thing that's the most important to me as a field marketer is this concept of the double secret handshake. So the double secret handshake is, how can you get in somewhere where no one else can through the relationships that you've built? And when I got dropped into any market that I was living in and working in, I would instantly try to figure out, where are the double secret handshakes in the culture that I'm in? Is it a location? Is it a relationship? Is it an event? Is it an athlete? Who is it? And what is it? So I would try to mark out like kind of these 3 white whales, right? Like, if I could do this, this, and this, I will be incredibly successful within San Francisco, within Cincinnati, Ohio, wherever I ended up, Portland, Oregon now. And if these 3 things are true, then I will be successful. And in a lot of different cases, and in every case, it was about amplifying what was already there. It wasn't about me bringing my agenda to San Francisco or Cincinnati or to Portland. It was about understanding what the city cared about and how could I leverage what Red Bull was doing to make it better. And it came through the relationships of the people that we met. And those conversations were always, how do we add value? It wasn't, hey, we have an initiative as a brand and we want you to participate. It was, what are you working on? What's exciting to you? What do you think needs to happen in this city? What would be the cool thing? And that was the white whale, right? What is the thing that I could help unlock that would just like open this city up or open up this opportunity for these people and really mean something? And if you have this mindset, as opposed to how do I impose my will on this market, you ultimately will be successful. And I think it takes a lot of introspection to figure out what are the things that matter to the city and to the people here and to the sort of, they called them like opinion leaders, right? The people that are really leading the charge. How do you jump in with them, build a relationship, build trust so that you can have conversations like, what's important to you and how can I help? If you do those things, the rest kind of comes together. And once you do that one time, chances that you'll be able to do it another time are pretty good, because that person that's hyper connected in one category is probably connected to somebody else who's hyper connected in another category. So your ability to sort of leapfrog through different scenes and areas around town in the field just gets stronger and stronger the more value you bring to people. And when you do put on the event with the right people, or it doesn't even need to be an event, but when you do this thing with the people that matter and people see that, it gives you even more power to be able to do this thing. I was explaining it to someone the other day. It's almost like in Star Wars, it's like the Force, right? Like this thing that's around us and, all the time. How do you harness it to create something that didn't exist previously? And it really came down to like, all these amazing people live in this city. How do I harness all of that to do something really special that's never been done? And it never was really about like, I know, let's drop a bucket of cash on everyone. It was just like really getting to the root of like, what do you care about? And how can we work together to make that thing come true? And a lot of times it was like, oh, I'm trying to get access to this thing. And you're like, oh, actually, I have that contact. Let me get it for you. And then it was really about like putting these things together because you had access to the force of the city. And it was just about connecting dots more than anything. And when you are someone who's bringing value, the number one thing that you're doing is just connecting dots. Like, oh, this is valuable. This is valuable. If I put these two things together, all of a sudden we've got something really special here. And a lot of the times it wasn't necessarily that first connection, but it was like the second or third effect from that. Like these two started working together and then this opened up. And then we put these guys together with this and then we had this. So I think it all comes back down to like, how do you bring value to people? How do you do something that's valuable to them and meaningful to them? And it's so backwards from how so many brands think about stuff. And if they could just take a deep breath, take a step back and answer the question of like, what's important to the people that we care most about and how can we play a role in that? Life would be a lot easier for these brands.
No kidding. Do you have an example of a favorite or effective double secret handshake?
There's a lot of, okay. Here's a story. Sure. Maybe you're familiar, maybe not, but there was a Mac Miller who was like a really famous rapper, right? I put on an event when I first got to Cincinnati, Ohio. This is like the first place I ever worked for Red Bull. I didn't know anybody. I got dropped in there. I thought, hey, I'm from the Midwest. I could figure this out. And I put on this event where we had a bunch of DJs come together for the event. And leading up to the event for months prior, I was kind of going out and meeting all the different DJs and getting a feel for the different styles of DJs that we want. And my thing was always, okay, we're going to do the event and then we're going to take the DJs from the event and plug them into a bunch of events afterwards. So it's not just like a one-off thing. It's going to continue to kind of grow from there. And one of the DJs was this guy, Clockwork. And Clockwork and I got to be really good friends because Cincinnati's a small town. And I was also trying to plug him into all these things afterwards. And when I moved on to San Francisco, Clockwork came through to he had gotten like on Mac Miller's tour as like the DJ, right? But it was like his first year. They didn't really know each other that well. And we had a relationship at Red Bull with the Golden State Warriors, and I had tickets to the Red Bull box or whatever. I had these extra tickets, and so Clockwork invited me out to Mac Miller's show, and this was when Mac Miller was playing to like 400 people. This is way before the Ariana Grande phase, and it had been Mac. It was Mac's birthday that week, and a bunch of the guys that were with him were just kind of touring around. He like brought his buddies on tour with him and stuff. And it was his birthday, and all the guys, like, nobody got him a birthday present. And he was kind of bummed. And I slid these 2 tickets to Clockwork, and he brought Mac to the Red Bull suite for a basketball game as like his birthday present. And from that point on, those 2 were inseparable. And then they went on to be on MTV together, and then Mac and Clockwork toured all over the world together. And probably those 2 tickets that, cost $100, made a huge difference in somebody's life. And there's no Red Bull initiative for like culture marketing tied to that. But had we wanted to do anything with either one of those guys, and even now I could call up Clockwork and call that favor back in, and it would be no problem. And I think so much of what I was trying to do, again, in the moment, I wasn't trying to do anything other than bring value to somebody. But in the end, will he always help me out if I need something? Absolutely. And if you do that at scale over time, yeah, sure, you're maybe not going to hang out with famous rappers and have tickets to Golden State Warriors boxes, but that's not the point. The point is that like I brought him value that meant something to him long term, and he'll always come back to help me out if I ever need anything, including if I wanted to connect him with another person or whatever else. And I think that's just a good example of how, you're not always trying to get a short-term return on every single thing. If you just bring value to people and you help them out and you do what you can, it always comes back.
That's great. There's something that I see in you just as listening to your podcast and doing some research for this conversation. Something that I see as a thread in your life is that you kind of play the role of coach, it seems like, in a lot of ways, or it seems like you're always bringing value to the people who are important around you. Like if you go back to even making VHS videos of your buddies on trials bike, like you were supporting them and helping them their career as an athlete manager at Red Bull. You're supporting these Red Bull athletes and basically making their careers as athletes better, but also their lives and hopefully their post-professional athlete careers better. You're doing the same thing with Super Rider. You're adding value. Same thing with Second Nature. I'm just curious what it is. Well, not what it is about you that draws that. That's a whole separate conversation. Because I love it. I think it's super important. I think the world needs more coaches. What are you doing for yourself to get that support? Like, where do you get that support from? Because it seems like you're giving it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know you're receiving a lot from it as well, 100%. And that's not why you're doing it, but it's coming back to you. But as like a solopreneur, as a business person who's just like, you're trying to make this new future for yourself, it's challenging. You talk about it lots on your podcast. Business is hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes as entrepreneurs, like we get caught in the roller coaster or we're like riding the dips. What do you do for yourself to kind of find that support?
That's a really great question because it comes down to the short-term return on so much of this stuff is non-existent. And that can be really difficult to think about. The long-term is absolutely there. And, 20 years of a career of bringing value to people makes me feel very confident that it always comes back. And sometimes it comes back when you least expect it. But if your attitude is to always bring value to people, I think that inspires a lot of people to bring value to you. And when it does happen, it feels pretty great. Recently, I had somebody just open up a bunch of doors for me just based on like, hey, I got a couple people I'd love to introduce you to. And who knows what'll happen from there. But isn't that great when that happens to you? When somebody turns around and does it for you, it feels pretty great. And I've never really thought of it as a strategy other than just, this is what I actually want to do. I want to be the plus 1% to anybody's program. And I just have this conviction that that's worth it. And over time, it'll just work out. And I think maybe that's a privileged position to be in, but also I've seen it many times work out in my favor where somebody did open a door for me, and it probably was because I brought them value 5 years ago or whatever. Even the Second Nature podcast that I'm doing with Dylan comes from 5 years ago. I forced him into starting a podcast, and that podcast is wildly successful now. And Dylan came back to me and said, all right, let's do a podcast together. And now, Second Nature is off to the races. That came from something that I brought value for. And the business of Second Nature is still, kind of up in the air a little bit, but I think it's long-term headed in the right direction. And again, our goal is to bring value to the people that are on the podcast as well as the people that listen to the podcast. And I think it's going to work out. And I just have this belief in the same way that Red Bull had that belief of if we just take care of people and bring value to them, it'll work out. And surely there's a product that can be bought that sort of subsidizes that mindset and approach. But I don't think it's any different for what I do. I think that if I just bring 1% extra to everybody that I meet, even a tiny portion of that will come back to me. And that's all I really need.
That's great. I'm not that you need it, but I get a lot out of the Second Nature podcast.
I'm glad. I mean, that's what makes it worth doing, and that's the reason why I've been a field marketing manager. I've been an athlete manager. I've been a podcast host because I just cannot help myself from trying to bring value to the people around me. And what's interesting about, how we said content is, so important, or distribution is so important, is that now we can reach thousands of people. Instead of me just working kind of hand to hand with one person, I can help thousands of people in one shot. That feels pretty great to be able to do at scale. And I just feel like over time that hopefully we'll be able to help more and more people and bring value to more and more people. And I think there's a lot of value for the people that we put on the podcast too. I don't think it's just a one-way thing. I think that and hopefully it only gets more valuable, but being featured on the podcast also maybe opens up some doors and puts people there. And a lot of people that are on the pod are also in our Slack channel. So there's like an instant connection. But
yeah, the Slack channel is amazing. And if you're listening to this, you need to listen to Second Nature podcast, and then you need to go join the Slack channel, because it is, if a lot of the outdoor and bike industry is on LinkedIn, the people that you actually want to talk to in those industries are on the Second Nature Slack channel. So yeah, it's like it's a very good niche of active people who have interesting, engaging thoughts and talk about bringing value. It's just constant. People are just constantly bringing value to each other in it. So it's a very cool service that you're provided.
That podcast, or sorry, the Slack channel came from an insight that everyone would keep hitting us up being like, I have like one more thing to add to what you were talking about. And we were just trying to figure out what is the way that we could facilitate that? How can we make it? Do we do a monthly live stream where everybody can come in and kick in their 2 cents? Do we host a Zoom call? Like, what is the way to do it? And the Slack channel just felt like such an obvious way of like, you know what? Most of these people are at work because they work in the industry. What if we just made a channel for them to come together and share what they learned? And I do feel that although a lot of people are in competitive brands, they still bring and share value with each other and open doors for each other and give insights to each other. And there's just so much value being exchanged in that channel right now that, again, it just feeds the overall like, cool, this is what we should be doing. We should just be valuable, and the rest will work itself out.
It's a meta example of all the things we've talked about too. I mean, like, we could just take the Second Nature podcast as an example of like, how do you build a brand? How do you build content? How do you build a community? How do you bring them together? How do you add value? Like, it's a case study. And I mean, it makes sense. You and Dylan are very thoughtful about how you're going about doing things.
Yeah. It seems so simple when you just put it out there like, oh, yeah, I just bring value to people and then it works out. I mean, there is nuance to it, but ultimately it is kind of that simple. And I feel like if more people started from exactly that place, like, how can I be valuable to the world, right? Like, that's it. It's really that simple. Like, it's not overcomplicated. We didn't have like a big business plan for Second Nature, and I didn't have one for Super Rider either. We're starting to figure stuff out, but it was really just like, let's just start doing something that we think is valuable to our close circle. And if more people are in it, then cool. And we'll figure out the rest as it goes, because, there's the Mike Tyson quote, like, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And I just think, yeah, let's just start doing this thing. And then We'll figure it out. Our audience is going to tell us what they want from us and what they don't want from us, and then we'll figure it out. If we go in, all right, episode 1, here's how we're going to monetize this thing. Here's how we're going to do this. Like, it's just not going to go.
Yeah. It leads to a good question. I had a question for you about the infinite game. That's something that you and Dylan will refer to every once in a while on the podcast about the infinite game. So I think this is an appropriate time to ask you, like, what is the draw to you? What is your draw to that book, The Infinite Game? But also, what do you take away from it and how you're applying it to? I mean, it sounds like you are applying all of it to your life. I'm just curious to hear your perspective, kind of the deep dive on The Infinite Game.
So The Infinite Game, for those who haven't read, is basically this book by Simon Sinek. And the concept is essentially, what decisions would you make for your business if your business was going to be around in 100 years? So not worrying about your year-end KPIs and stuff, although that stuff is important. What are the decisions that you'd make if you wanted to do this kind of thing infinitely? And I think it's a really sustainable place to go when you're trying to build a business or where you're trying to figure out what to do with your life. What's something that I would want to do indefinitely? And what would be the decisions that I would have to make to be able to do that? And I think content is a really easy one because it's like, well, I could talk to people on a podcast and indefinitely, I could ride my bike, hopefully indefinitely. I love doing these things. And if I could essentially, like, the thought experiment that I go through is like, okay, what needs to be true in order for me to do this? What are the things that I need to put in place so that I can infinitely do this thing and not be super stressed all the time or whatever? And that's sort of what I'm solving for right now. How can I continue to do this without burning myself out? And I think that's probably like the most important lesson from The Infinite Game for me, is burnout is a real thing if you're just grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. So how do you think about your infinite game when it comes to, I want to make mountain bike videos, I want to do a podcast, but it's a lot to be able to do both those things week in and week out. If I'm going to play this infinite game, what do I need to be true? I probably need to find an editor. I probably need to find more sponsors so that I can pay for that editor. And then how do I set up essentially this flywheel so that I can do the things that I want to do as long as I can? And I think the infinite game is really important when it comes to content, because if you're an athlete competing in a sport and you don't have a content arm of your overall business or your flywheel or whatever, you are playing a finite game. Your career, you will at some point stop being competitive, and then you'll have nothing and you'll be done, which is a really harsh way to say that, but it's true. When you stop being competitive, if you don't have anything else kind of in place, it's really hard. And that, for me, was actually the founding insight of why I started pushing my athletes into content, which we can talk about. But to answer your question on the infinite game, I want to find the things that I love, and I want to do those things forever. What needs to be true so that I can play this infinite game of doing the things that I love forever? And that's the puzzle that I'm sort of solving for. So it's not really about like, how do I max out and make like as much money as possible? Because I think you could really burn yourself out, and, maybe you can do that infinitely. I don't know, but it's not really about that. It's about this level of sustainability of like, what are the things that I need to do to be successful? And then how can I make sure that all I have to worry about is the creativity that goes into it, and not the structure or, the basic stuff.
Yeah. One thing we've referred to it a couple of times, and that's running. And I know that's kind of maybe what got you the YouTube channel. You've had this thing in your past where when you were working with a Red Bull athlete, you'd basically learn the sport of the athlete, mm-hmm. and which is super admirable, right? Like, it's giving you empathy, it's giving you understanding. I love the idea of it. I'm really curious about this specifically around running and what drew you to running long distances. Because like I said, there's kind of I have all these friends who are now all of a sudden ultra runners, and it's mm-hmm. super admirable. Like, I can't wrap my head around running 100 miles. I can't wrap my head around running 50 miles. But what is it that drew you to the running, other than wanting to learn the sport that Dylan Bowman was doing? But then also, my other question is, what have you learned about yourself through running long distances?
I think one of the most important unlocks from becoming a runner and going directly into ultra running was how you can actually do this impossible sounding thing in a pretty straightforward way. There's if you've heard of Cirque du Soleil, it's like this crazy show where people do like flips and there's, all kinds of different sports being represented there. And one of the things is a really crazy insight that I didn't realize previously. I had a friend who was in Cirque du Soleil who was a trials rider. And I was asking him about the show itself, like, oh, what kind of tricks are you doing in the show and whatever. He was down at the Florida one. He was like, yeah, I'm riding at like 40% of my ability level, basically. That way I can stay consistent and not mess up on stage and whatever else. And then I thought about it like, whoa, so all these people that are like blowing my mind are also doing about 40%. Like no one is actually at their limit during a Cirque du Soleil show, which is sort of mind blowing because it's insane. Like if you've ever seen any of those shows, you can't even fathom how they're able to do what they're doing. And now you realize that probably they're like making grocery lists in their head while they're doing quadruple backflips in the air. They're just like bored because they've done it a billion times. And so ultra running for me is sort of the same thing of like, oh my God, that is the gnarliest thing ever. How could anybody do that? And then you realize like, oh wait, no, there's a formula for doing this, both with training to get to that point and also for the fueling and understanding how all those things come together. And then I realized like, oh yeah, most of these people can run way farther than 100 miles if they fueled and trained correctly. So actually running a 50K isn't like the peak of it's not their limit. Wow. Oh, so I had like sort of a similar light switch go off when I approached it of, wait a minute, this seemed like the craziest thing you can do, but now there's people running 200 miles or even, like running full, like I ran the Appalachian Trail, whatever. And I think I had sort of like a similar realization of like, wait, you could run indefinitely if you could figure out training and fueling. That was sort of the unlock for me mentally, was understanding that. What I've learned about myself since I started running that's a great question. I think maybe I haven't had like a key insight about myself other than I can do hard things. And if I apply, basic structures like training and fueling, I can really kind of unlock anything. I think if anything, maybe what I've learned most is that I'm really great at being consistent, but I don't know when to stop being consistent. So I could train and run as many races that I want, but like, should I? And I think with content stuff, I sometimes ask myself that question where it's like, everything that I'm working on, I've proven to myself that if I'm consistent long enough, I will be successful. But is that actually the right answer for everything? Because if I wanted to, I could just nuke myself by starting up 10 YouTube channels and consistently putting out content, but then quality suffers or my focus suffers. And so I think what I've learned both with running and content is that you can do anything. You just can't do it all at the same time.
Nice. Are you still running?
Occasionally. I ran with Ryan Thrower when he was visiting here. So much of my time now is spent on mountain bikes, sure. But I feel like there's another, maybe there's another chapter of running coming up soon. I still run, but I'm doing more like weightlifting and riding now just to stay super fit. And I'm so focused on making sure that the mountain bike channel can continue growing and doing its thing that, yeah, usually if I have a free second where I'm not talking to somebody on a podcast like this one or Second Nature or whatever, I'm probably on two wheels.
Oh, that's a good place to be. I always close with one final question, which is how do you define success for yourself? And you always close the Second Nature podcast with what you call the BPC, yeah. brand, product, or content. So I thought we would combine the two. We don't have to combine the two answers, but we'll combine the two questions. So we'll start with BPC. Wonder if you brought a BPC that you could share with the audience today.
Yes, I do. There is someone that I'm really interested in. We're gonna have him on the pod coming up soon too, but his name is Patrick Crawford, and my BPC is this article that he was interviewed for called "Influencers versus Content Creators: Who's Winning in 2025." Patrick Crawford is a really fascinating guy because he was he founded Free Skiing magazine, but he also Free Skier. Might need a fact check on that one, but either way, he founded a skiing magazine. But then he also started this company called Inkwell, and during my time at Red Bull, Inkwell was the social media agency that dealt with all of the biggest athletes in the world. So if you remember the Free Solo movie, yeah, that was them marketing that through athlete socials. They worked with Travis Rice, they worked with Jimmy Chin. All the biggest names were on Inkwell from like the outdoor and action sports world. And I was always so fascinated. And I've been reading his Zero Draft Substack for a while. And then we got on a call and I didn't realize that was actually the same guy. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm like a super fanboy. But this article that he was interviewed for is really just, it feels like required reading for anybody that works at a brand that's working with content creators, because I think that Patrick is really good at sort of reorganizing people's thoughts around like what's actually important. Like there was the interviewer asked him a question about like, oh, what's better, TikTok or YouTube? And he's like, well, actually, what are you trying to accomplish? And what is your goal? Because for each goal, maybe one is better than the other. It's not that simple. And here's how I think of the difference between an influencer and a creator. And he just really kind of redefines a lot of stuff in a way that's really succinct and valuable. And he does this thing called Cadence Media Strategy now, which I think, yeah, the insights that this guy has when it comes to content creation and content strategy and everything, this guy's a wizard. So this article is a great primer on him, and yeah, highly recommended.
Very cool. I'll link to it in the show notes. It makes me think like that idea of like, well, what is it that you're looking for? The question I always try to start with is like, what is the result we're looking for?
Yeah.
Like, let's just start with that question. What is the result we're looking for? No, that's a good one. I'll give a similar one. It's also one thing we didn't talk about is the power of Substack and the written word, which is, I think the personal blog is coming back. It's coming back to style. I know you're a fan of Ryan Holiday. Are you familiar with Billy Oppenheimer?
No.
Okay, so Billy Oppenheimer is Ryan Holiday's research assistant.
Oh, okay.
And he has the most power in the fewest words newsletter on the internet. It's called 6 at 6. I'll link to it. I'll send you the link to Aaron.
Sweet.
And it's called 6 at 6, and it's one theme, but it's 6 stories or anecdotes that tie together this one theme. And it's one of those things where I love connections, especially when they're from various different subjects and they kind of come together into one theme. The guy's a master, and you can tell that he's constantly consuming very good content.
So cool. Oh, I love that. That's good insight. Yeah.
Okay,
big Ryan Holiday fan. The Daily Stoic is like one of my top recommended books. So if there is a guy behind the guy, that's where I want to be. That's awesome.
I feel like Billy Oppenheimer is one of those things where it's like in 10 years, you like when he has a best-selling book on the New York Times, you're like, oh yeah, I used to read his newsletter back in the day.
So cool.
Okay, so that's the BPC. The question I always end with is, how do you define success for yourself?
That is a really great question. I think it really comes down to just I'm more of a quality over quantity kind of guy, and I want to be feeling good about supporting the people around me and bringing value to them. Like it all just comes back to that. I do track my YouTube stats. I care about that stuff because it is a signal of, am I bringing value to people? Do people care about what I have to say? Are they drawing any value from that? So it's like sort of a quantitative way to look at it, but I think it really does come down to this qualitative, like, do I feel like I'm doing something useful? Am I valuable to the people around me? Am I bringing value with every single project that I put out? Do I feel like I'm using my time appropriately? And so I think it's a little bit, maybe it's a little wishy-washy, but how I define success is just really, do I feel like I'm bringing enough value? Am I doing it right? And what could I be doing to bring more value to people? And where can I put my energy to make sure that that's true?
That's excellent. That's great. Well, I wish you more of that success then.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I appreciate it, Aaron. It's been a pleasure connecting with you and learning. What else do you have to share with us, or where do you want to send people? You've got a couple of different places on the internet that people can find you.
Yeah, if you're a bike rider, go check out Super Rider. It's Super Rider TV on Instagram, and actually it's the same on YouTube, but you could just search out Super Rider and you'll probably find it. If you care about mountain biking, there's a newsletter as well. So every Monday I send out like my favorite bike videos from the week and a tip, a riding tip and some editorial and stuff like that as well. So we're basically everywhere. But if you really care about the business of the outdoor industry, I think Second Nature is a really great place to start. And again, it comes back to the value. Like we're trying to speak to as many people and share out their learnings. And one of the things that I'm trying really hard to do with that podcast is get people to share more of their horror stories. Because if we're all there to learn, you're not really learning if someone's just flexing about the high points of their career. You gotta like get into the really rough times, because that's when that person learned the most, and that's what everyone else is going to learn from. And so I'm trying to sort of normalize the horror story without turning into, whatever. But I want to share as much as we possibly can there. And I think one of the things that makes Second Nature special that I'm sort of trying to do with Dylan is also make it valuable in a sort of evergreen sense. So it's not necessarily, although it's about the business of the outdoor, it's not necessarily a news thing. It's really about like, here's lessons that I learned in my journey and I want to share with other people. So you could listen to, episode 20 or episode 120 and you'd still get value out of everything. It's meant to kind of just, again, bring value to people in a meaningful way, both people on the microphone and people listening to it.
Yeah, well, 100%. If you listen to this podcast, you will be a fan of the Second Nature podcast, because we are doing very similar things. We have very similar outlooks on life, business, and the outdoor industry. So we're cousins in that way.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Appreciate it so much, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end of this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend who you think may enjoy it too. You can also take a few seconds to subscribe to the podcast. Anything you do to help share the love here, we'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.